Hello, this is Eastern Europe Review, the common project of BELSAT and TVP World, with reports and analysis from Ukraine, Belarus and Russia. I'm Alexandra Shapalina, and these are the main stories. Russian military commanders wanted to take over Bakhmut by the anniversary of the full-scale war, but they did not manage to do it.
We cover our infantry. That is, if the enemy starts activity, we hold them off. When we were in hotspots, we disrupted their attacks several times, and thus managed to keep our infantry alive.
Tsikhanouskaya is running a non-stop marathon to stand for democratic Belarus. The latest stop was at the Munich Security Conference.
The war, our regional war, can't end until Belarus becomes democratic. With Lukashenko's regime, with the influence that Putin has on him, there will be no peace and security in our region.
Celebrations in Russia against the backdrop of the war. People attending the events commemorated those who died in the war with Ukraine and glorified Vladimir Putin.
I want to say that once again our President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin has demonstrated to our entire country and the whole world that he is an ardent patriot and a great defender of our homeland.
The Russian army continues its offensive in the east of Ukraine, which has received widespread publicity. They have succeeded in advancing several kilometers in some areas, sacrificing hundreds of lives of their mobilized men in return. Traditionally, the most dangerous area is near Bakhmut. Russian military commanders wanted to present this small town in the Donetsk region to Putin on the anniversary of the full-scale war. However, they are still experiencing problems as Ukrainians are desperately fighting back. Our next story is right from the front line.
This is the southern flank of the Bakhmut bridgehead. Here, the Ukrainian troops are holding their defense by occupying dominant heights and peaks. The Russians are below and are occasionally attacking in small groups like now. This is how the Ukrainian mortarmen come into play.
We cover our infantry. That is, if the enemy starts activity, we hold them off. When we were in hotspots, we disrupted their attacks several times, and thus managed to keep our infantry alive.
The team works as smoothly as possible. They do everything to save time, and time is the most vital resource here. Mortar men are at their most vulnerable when they're firing. So when the next mortar is fired, there are soldiers on duty with other shells already prepared. It's like an assembly line.
15 kilograms. Wow, 15 kilograms is 15 kilograms. Why is it hard? It's not hard.
After each shot, the mortarmen adjust the sights. All the while, a drone hovers over enemy positions and improves the precision of the firing. Soon, the command arrives to intensify the shelling. The military activates another barrel. It could strike back here at any moment. The Ukrainian military understands this, but keeps firing back.
We had some pretty scary days when we were working under return fire, and there was a time when I almost got hit in the head by a shell. I could see the rear impeller of it spinning. It was a bit scary.
At some point, we go to a shelter. It is here, over hot tea, that the soldiers speak honestly about the situation.
We lead an active defense. We encounter the enemy quite seldom. They are not eager to get into our positions. We therefore have to seek them out and shoot them down.
The situation is more difficult in Bakhmut itself. With heavy losses, the Russians continue to try to push the Ukrainian army out of their positions. The fighting is intense. These are Ukrainian artillerymen near Bakhmut, while the infantry in the trenches is holding back another wave of Russian troops. Howitzers are killing them en masse. But each new wave empties Ukrainian arsenals, so shells are also being counted here.
I wish we had NATO weapons and more ammunition, but we are managing with what we have. I take it you are using the ammunition very efficiently now? Yes, we are only working with UAVs or drone spotters, so as not to blast randomly. We receive information on a target and what type of projectile we should shoot, and then we already understand what kind of target it is. Have you been shooting just now? Onto infantry. Just infantry. They are not protected from shrapnel.
On the anniversary of the start of the full-scale war, the Russian troops are desperately trying to capture Bakhmut. The Ukrainian defense forces are resisting the attack, and it does not seem that they are about to surrender the semi-enclosed town.
Belarusian Democratic leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya is running a non-stop marathon. Another point was the Munich Security Conference. During the meetings with the most influential politicians and public figures, she defines the role of Belarus for security in the region, raises money for the victory of Belarusians over the dictatorship, and tries to convince Western leaders to keep the doors open for Belarusians. Details in our report from Munich.
Belarusian Democratic leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya attended the Munich Security Conference and joined the world's most influential politicians. This oldest and largest forum is attended by heads of state, ministers and journalists from all over the world. What message did Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya bring to Munich?
The war, our regional war, can't end until Belarus becomes democratic. With Lukashenko's regime, with the influence that Putin has on him, there will be no peace and security in our region.
The Belarusian Democratic leader has had about 30 discussions and meetings in 2 days. For example, she met with one of the most influential politicians in the U.S. Democrat Party, Nancy Pelosi, former Speaker of the U.S. Congress. The chairman of the European Commission and the former Minister of Defense of Germany, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the Czech Republic, Petr Pavel, or the world-famous philanthropist George Soros, whose foundation was expelled from Belarus by the Lukashenko regime back in 1997. The leitmotif of this year's conference was, of course, Russia's war against Ukraine. However, the Belarusian accent was also strong.
The Belarusian question can't be left for the day after the war, after the victory. We need to solve it now. As I said, the destinies of our countries are interconnected.
The connection between Russia's de facto occupation of Belarus and the war against Ukraine has been well understood in Munich. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya took part in several discussions. One of them was called, for example, Struggle for European Freedoms. What does the struggle of Ukraine and Belarus mean for our future? For the organizers, the Belarusian and Ukrainian struggles are parts of the same process.
The general message is not to forget about Belarus. Of course, I understand that the focus is now on Ukraine. We also support it, but not everyone realizes how Belarus can affect security in the region.
Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya came to Munich, among other things, to talk with Western politicians about issues of Belarusians.
We also talk about the migration problems of Belarusians. This concerns not only Belarusians in the European Union, their legalization, apostille, how to obtain residency permits. This applies to the visa policy of the European Union countries, which issue visas to Belarusians who are still in the country.
In addition, Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya asked foreign partners to host former Belarusian political prisoners.
How is Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya perceived? Very warmly. This is not only because of the attitude towards Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya as a person, although this is very important, but also out of respect for the struggle of the Belarusian people who haven't surrendered for 2.5 years and are demanding democratic changes.
The way Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya is perceived can be helpful when she talks with politicians, businessmen and public figures about Belarus. For example, when she discusses coordinated strategy in defense of Belarusian independence with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, or when she talks about the increased participation of Belarus in the projects of the Council of Europe with the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iceland, Þórdís Kolbrún, who currently chairs the Council of Europe. It can also help to convey that Belarus plays a key role as far as security issues in Eastern Europe are concerned.
This week, Russians celebrated Defender of the Fatherland Day. In Russia, for the first time in modern history, this date was celebrated on a grand scale. For the first time, the regional authorities were obliged to organize concerts and rallies with the aim of convincing people of the need to protect the country from enemies.
Patriotic songs could be heard in the main squares of hundreds of Russian cities as early as February the 22nd, when a 4-day holiday officially started. The bank holiday, which is called Defender of the Fatherland Day, is celebrated on the 23rd. During these holidays, Russians usually relax and have fun. But before the holidays, many people who work in the civil service, students and pensioners were forced to participate in the official events. In the large Siberian coal mining region of Kuzbas, the authorities organized a concert and forced people to attend the event. People were holding Russian flags, symbols of Vladimir Putin's party, and cards with the letter Z, which Russians consider to be a symbol of the war in Ukraine.
I want to say that once again our President Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin has demonstrated to our entire country and the whole world that he is an ardent patriot and a great defender of our homeland.
It takes more than 4 hours by plane to travel from Moscow to the Kemerovo region. The day before, its governor returned back after attending Vladimir Putin's speech to the Federal Assembly. Government explained to the heads of the regions the nuances of propaganda and agitation in the Russian capital. They should tell people that the country is now in danger. The enemies are those who don't support Russia in the war against Ukraine. But it is not necessary to say exactly who it is. Putin himself took the stage at a patriotic concert in Moscow. Similar events were also held in other regions. But even those who had been prepared to speak to journalists couldn't give a coherent speech without hesitating.
We must unite. Unity is extremely important to end this terrible pressure that our people, the Russian world, are experiencing today from the West and NATO. It's very important that each person can contribute his own... I'm not saying that again.
Saratov is based in the southeast European part of Russia. Most of those who came to the square were students. They say they wanted to come by themselves, but their lecturers let slip that the rally distribution list was issued by the university's chancellor's office.
We had a question about whether to take first-year students, still not 18 years old. You know, they expressed their wish and said they just have to take part.
This is a phenomenon. For the first time since 1991, the celebrations of the Defender of the Fatherland Day, which is officially celebrated in Russia on February the 23rd and declared a day off, began earlier. Russians have witnessed a series of transformation of the meaning of the holiday. After the collapse of the USSR in modern Russian history, February the 23rd was actually celebrated as Men's Day. Now it has been filled with militaristic meaning, and in fact it has been put on the same level as Victory Day on May the 9th.
I'm proud of the fact that all of Russia has rallied. We all support this operation. We are worried about the guys who are at the front. I hope it will be over soon and Russia will win, so that no one threatens our country.
However, other opinions are heard outside of the pro-government rallies. Here's what people say in the streets of St. Petersburg.
It is difficult to talk about any victory, because entry into the war was a political defeat in itself. We see, accordingly, a slightly different Russia. We travel a lot and see. We have a lot of things to do in Russia. We need to restore Russia. Factories have been closed. People graduate from colleges, get a free diploma, and work as waiters, because they can get some tips there and so on.
In Russia, even school children are now instilled with patriotism and support for the war. In the Far East, in the Jewish Autonomous Region, the authorities instructed teachers to hold thematic events, and so the children draw the military and pack the parcels to the front, just to make sure no one doubts about the role of the Russian army in the full-scale war against Ukraine. In several districts of Buryatia, in the north of the country, all festive events were cancelled due to a series of funerals of those killed in Ukraine.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Eastern Europe Review. We will be back next week with the news stories. I'm Alexandra Shapalina. Keep watching TVP World and see you next time.